My subject this afternoon is the importance of Tom Thomson in the formation of the career of Lawren Harris. I will argue that Lawren Harris imbibed a great deal from Tom Thomson, the forerunner of the Group of Seven, but that the viewer of Painting Canada sees this merely in a handful of Harris's canvases. Rather and more importantly, Harris's courage to invent and reinvent himself from 1917, the year of Thomson's death, was prodded by his great admiration of Thomson, from whom he learned what it was to be an explorer of the imagination. At the outset, there is a paradox here, because Lawren Harris, the painter, fits uncomfortably into the work of Thomson in the later members of the Group of Seven, and thus into the exhibition of paintings on display here. However, on these walls, that is in Painting Canada, I find a great deal of evidence of Lawren Harris, the proselytizer, the instigator of the Group of Seven, the man who believed that Canadian art had to be redefined. Moreover, I see a man who dared, like Thomson, to explore the uncharted territories of his imagination. I am beginning with these seeming paradoxes because I think the story of Lawren Harris and the Group of Seven needs redrawing, a task I undertook in part in my just published biography of him. I will begin with the paintings on display, works which are for the most part radically different from all other members of the group. There are 124 paintings in this exhibition, 20 of them by Harris. One is from 1914, 2 are from 1919-20, 6 are Lake Superiors from 1923 through 7. There are 7 mountain landscapes from 1927-1930, and from slightly later, the Arctic subjects. The winter decorating paintings, you see 2 examples here, one from the National Gallery and one from the McMichael. These winter decorating paintings originate from 1914 and show Harris in the decorative mode that both he and Jim MacDonald used after attending the Scandinavian exhibition in Buffalo in 1913. The 6 Lake Superior images here are very much in the mode of, if I could say, like above Lake Superior, the breakthrough canvas shown at the second exhibition of the Group of Seven in 1921. The remaining mountain and Arctic paintings from 1927 through 31 show Harris moving in the direction of abstraction. Only 2 paintings in Painting Canada, Tamaracks and Blue Hill from about 1919, and Trees and Pool from about 1920, display Harris painting in a manner that I think typical of the Group of Seven. In Tamaracks, the color palette extends to red, yellow, blue, and various greens. The use of yellows and greens in Trees and Pools is not dissimilar from the works of his confederates. Moreover, I would point out, the remaining Harrises on display in Painting Canada, for the most part, show the artist working in a very restricted color range of blues, grays, whites, and some green. Jackson and Harris were the only members of the group who were not trained as designers. Of course, Thomson also worked as a designer. A.Y. Jackson spent some time in Paris, where he saw a great deal of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist work. Designers often use bright colors, and Jackson saw a great number of similar jewel-like colors in his Europe. Harris, trained in Berlin, was more used to a much more restricted color range. As a young man in Germany, he also became aware that landscape painting can be made to incorporate into itself mystical and spiritual values. I think it is symbolist art. In this regard alone, he was cut off from his confederates. Like Thomson and members of the group, he searched for distinctively Canadian solutions to the renditions of landscape. Unlike them, he was from the get-go attracted to adding a spiritual, transcendent dimension to his Canadian landscapes. In looking at an image such as Tom Thomson's Tamarack from 1915, Harris would have seen how readily the other artist incorporated decorative techniques in his work. Harris, as we've already seen, depicted snow in blue, and obviously in blue, and a series of associated colors, mauve, pink, and yellow. But in this painting, obviously autumnal, Thomson's vivid, vigorously painted autumnal yellow trees are much more visceral than Harris's, and I'll continue in that vein in a moment. In contrast to Harris, Tom Thomson possessed both willingness and know-how. During this time period, Harris had great ambition, but his know-how was lagging. I'm talking about 1914, 1915, 1916. In Thomson, Harris witnessed a man who was willing to give his all in the pursuit of art. In April 1916, Harris, his cousin Chester, Dr. McCallum, and Tom Thomson traveled to the Cochon Lakes area in the northeastern district of Algonquin Park. Harris had a vivid recollection of an incident, I'm quoting him, one afternoon when a dramatic thunderstorm came up. There was a wild rush of wind across the lake and all nature was tossed into a turmoil. Tom and I were in an abandoned lumber shack. When the storm broke, Tom looked out, grabbed his sketch box, ran out into the gale, squatted behind a big stump, and commenced to paint in a fury. As James McCallum recalled, the wind blew down the tree, that is the tree of the west wind, and Harris at first thought Thomson was killed, but Thomson soon sprang up, waved his hand to him, and went on painting. In this instance, Harris was not so much interested in what Thomson was painting as much as he was moved by the artist's intensity, of his ability to surrender to the unexpected moment. Here, Harris recalled, was symbolized the function of artist in life. He must accept in deep singleness of purpose the manifestations of life in man and in great nature, and transform these into controlled, ordered, and vital expressions of meaning. I would argue that a painting by Harris, such as Algonquin Park, ultimately such as his Algonquin Park paintings, show Harris imitating Thomson. Thomson unlikely died in the sort of freak accident that can befall in an expert woodsman. That is, I'm saying unlikely. But even before his death, there was an aura about this artist. His reputation as an untutored genius was just beginning to take off. And his sudden death in his 39th year demanded some sort of explanation beyond the mundane. Harris had no doubt that Thomson was a natural in the way he was not. He said, Thomson knew the North Country as none of us did, and he made us partners in his devotion to it. His last summer saw him produce his finest work. He was just moving into the full tide of his power when he was lost to us. He adds, Tom was an adept woodsman and canoeman. I think some sentences by Harris about Thomson can as easily be applied to him when he says, he was at the same time sensitive and given to despondency. He would often sit in the twilight, leaning over from his chair, facing his painting after working at high pitch all day, and flick bits of wooden matches on the thick, wet paint where they stuck. He had a high opinion of his own work, but as exaggeratedly good opinion of the work of the rest of us. To Harris and his Confederates, the death of Thomson was devastating. Suddenly, a man in the prime of life, one day alive and well, was dead the next. The perfect man, I quote Harris again, tall, lithe, and very graceful, had vanished, snatched away forever. Harris believed that Thomson had been murdered, and he might have wondered if the profession of artist was at bottom an immoral one. Tom had conducted his life in a way that was seen as unconventional and unseemly by many. Harris, who had the propensity to feel guilty, may have wondered if he was somehow part of a community that attempted to transgress traditional moral codes. Harris's increasing interest in theosophy was supposed to protect him from such concerns. It shielded him from such reflections in that his life was supposed to be connected to the harmony of existence. But he was faced, Harris was, with a terrible fact in 1917, that in comparison to himself, Thomson had completed a substantial body of first-rate work. Then he was taken. There might have been for Harris the unconscious fear that he might labor to reach the heights gained by Thomson and then have his life removed. Or Harris might have speculated that the true gift of art was given only to those the gods quickly destroy. He might have thought that he was somehow cursed. He would never attain the heights he envisioned for himself. He was an extremely ambitious man. Perhaps he had been passed over, did not really possess the talent he thought he did. He was very ambitious. He was very uncertain. In the midst of the misery of World War, such speculations would have been especially frightening. The first major painting expedition that Harris undertook after Tom's death was to Algoma. There, his eyes feasted on a much wilder landscape than he had witnessed before. In part, this explains the remarkable change that occurred. However, it does not sufficiently account for it. Here was a man who had suffered two tremendous losses. His brother had also died, and who was attempting to rebuild and refortify himself. Harris had obviously begun to see the world differently, and that alteration can be seen in the new canvases. In the Algoma landscapes, Harris did something new. He started to venture even more in the direction of Tom Thomson's inclinations as an artist. He had done this before, as I have suggested, but very intermittently. The new Harris pictures now use a color palette even closer to Thomson. The paint is applied in a manner reminiscent of the dead artist. In the process of mourning him, Harris internalized Thomson's creative strengths. This may not have been a process that Harris entered into consciously, but it is one in which he paid the greatest tribute he could to his dead comrade. Algoma Woods, too, which I've shown you, which is still owned by the Harris family, and then Waterfall Algoma at Hamilton, are deliberately less finished-looking landscapes than the Harrises in the previous 6 years. In Waterfall Algoma in particular, Harris combines brightly colored decorative richness with a rough, vigorous handling of brush strokes. They have what Harris later called, speaking of Algoma, a rich wildness. In that region, Harris and his friends, and I quote him, found that there were cloud formations and rhythms peculiar to different parts of the country and to different seasons of the year. We found that at times there were skies over the Great Lake Superior which, in their singing expansiveness and sublimity, existed nowhere else in Canada. In those stirring words can be discerned a person who is in the process of recovering from the emotional storms that had engulfed him after the death of Tom Thomson. Here he imitates Thomson. I would extend my remarks a bit further. Thomson may have served as an example to Harris that one must give one's all, whatever that all is, in the service of art. Unlike Jackson, MacDonald, Lismer, and the other members of the group of 7, and the obvious exception to this rule is Varley, Harris's future career was as an innovator, someone who was willing to take up new challenges. I'll return to my starting point. In Painting Canada, the viewer may see splendid examples of the artistry of Lawren Harris, but for the most part, his canvases here are not prototypical Group of 7 work. I don't think it's unfair to say, as I've intimated, that MacDonald, Lismer, and the others did not change very much. That observation can never hold for Harris. He relentlessly pursued new methods of expression, and in that regard, he was emulating Tom Thomson's commitment to painting as the essential component of someone's existence. If you are a true artist, this is what you do. You make a full commitment and you live your life accordingly. In terms of stylistic expression, there are few congruencies between Harris and Thomson. But in terms of an influence that pervades every aspect of Harris's subsequent art lies the shadow of Tom Thomson. Thank you.